safe. Boo!
Nice enough to join us from the Athletic Raiders Insider. You have a lot going on with the Raiders. Maybe he can help us understand what is going on. Tashan Reed with us. How are you today, Tashan?
Pretty good, man. Can't complain too much. How about yourself?
Yeah, we're good, and we appreciate your time. Look, I know you're getting a lot of questions about this. Christian Wilkins released Thursday. Yesterday, we heard some of the reports of locker room behavior that offended a teammate may have contributed to the decision to release him. What is going on? What light can you shed on this for us?
Yeah, so, going back to him getting released, the big question was why then, right? Because they avoided his the remaining guarantees in his contract back in June as a result of a back and forth they had for the last, few months leading up to that. For people that don't remember, he had a season foot injury last October, had surgery. But the team determined earlier this offseason that he would actually need a second procedure in order to properly heal. Wilkins didn't want to get that surgery. They were going back and forth. He never got the surgery. And so in June, that's when they avoided his guarantees, but they didn't release him then. Obviously, like, he was still on the team for another 7 weeks. And then suddenly, last week he gets released. And so the question that kind of was out there is like, all right, did something else happen? And, earlier this week when, Adam Schefter broke it, we got the insight that, there was an incident, where he, kissed a teammate on the head, and that teammate proceeded to go to HR and make a complaint. And from what I understand, first time something like that had happened in that realm with him, whether it's with teammates or opposing players on the field. I mean, there's, clips of, we've seen the clips circulating from in games, whether it's the situation with Josh Allen or even going back to Clemson. This is something that seems to be more of a pattern with him. But it was all part of the larger puzzle. Like, I don't know if it wasn't just one thing that his release. It was a combination of factors, both to do with his, rehab from his foot injury and also, this off the field conduct.
Wow. All right. Tashan Reed joining us. Tashan, let's talk about some football. Raiders' new coach, new starting quarterback, Geno Smith. Is he the engine, I guess, that drives this? Do they go as far as he goes? What's the vibe around there about Geno Smith so far?
So I definitely think he's a huge upgrade for them at quarterback. I'd argue that they made the biggest upgrade at quarterback among anybody in an NFL. It was a pretty rough position for them the last few years, ever since they moved on from Derek Carr. Really hadn't been able to find an answer, and I would say he's easily the best quarterback they've had in recent memory. He's a fringe top 10 guy, in my opinion. Where you rank him is up to you, but has a ton of arm talent, really accurate, smart guy. He's still mobile, even though he's 34 years old. And he has a ton of familiarity with Pete Carroll. With all that being said, I think there is some limitations to, how far he can take the offense, depending on how everything is set up around him. We saw it the last couple of years with the Seahawks. While he, had proven himself to be one of the better quarterbacks in the league, their offenses weren't very good the last couple of years, and that's because the offensive lines were terrible and they couldn't run the ball. And last year for the Raiders, two of the biggest issues that they had was the offensive line was terrible and they couldn't run the ball. Now, obviously, they made a huge upgrade at running back and Ashton Genty, so they have a ton of talent there. But the offensive line, to me, is really what this is all going to come down to. It was one of the worst units in the league last year, not just running the ball, but pass protection was pretty rough. And if that's the case again, like, there's going to be a ceiling on this offense, and they're really banking on, continuity. They brought back essentially all of the group from last year. The only addition they made was right guard Alex Kappa, and so they're betting a lot on the coaching staff's ability to coach them up and scheme around them. And I think that's really what's going to come down to. Like, Geno Smith is a huge upgrade for them as quarterback, but if they can't run the ball consistently and they can't protect them, there's only so much you can do.
That's Tashan Reed from The Athletic. And speaking of the coaches, I know that you wrote, quote, "The Pete Carroll effect is real." How so? How has that been evident so far?
Yeah, and so going back to last year, I would say the team culture had been in a good place under Antonio Pierce. It was just when it came to the ins and outs of being the head coach, he was very young in that and raw in that and wasn't able to produce results quickly enough in order to save his job. And so it's not like they had a terrible team culture or anything like that last year, but Pete Carroll, it just sort of has a different energy to it, because not only does he have, all of that, sort of rah-rah stuff and getting the guys fired up, but he has the credentials, right? He's a guy who's won a national championship, won a Super Bowl. And so there's more reason to genuinely believe in what he's saying in terms of what the team is going to go out and do. And that's, been carried over to the players pretty quickly. It's really not anybody that doesn't respect Pete Carroll, but at the same time, he's not just a guy that's coming in and putting his rings on the table and is like, all right, respect me. Like he still puts a lot of time into those interpersonal relationships, trying to get to know the guys, finding ways to relate to them, talking about things outside of football. And again, it's all stuff that the previous regime did, but I think the difference is, the credentials and the resume that a guy like Pete Carroll has. And so you've already seen the impact of that early on in training camp. It doesn't guarantee the team is going to go out and win 10 games or win a Super Bowl or whatever, but it is stuff that matters when it comes to building the foundation of this franchise.
I was looking at some of the Vegas over-unders for the Raiders. I think they have it at 7.5. Denver Chargers, I think, both at 9.5. Kansas City 11.5. When you look at the division, what's best case scenario you think for the Raiders this year?
I think for me, about 9 wins in terms of record feels like probably the best case scenario. Like this division is really tough. I mean, obviously we all know what to expect with the Chiefs, but you also have the Broncos and Chargers, teams that made the playoffs last season. And you look at those rosters, all three of those teams got better, in my opinion. They also have proven head coaches in their own right, and Sean Payton and Harbaugh and Andy Reid, of course. And so it's going to be tough sledding in the AFC West. And this team just has a ton of holes still on both sides of the ball from a roster standpoint. I mentioned offensive line, the receivers, another one. On the defensive side of the ball, obviously they have a big question mark at defensive tackle now with Christian Wilkins no longer being around, cornerback, nickelback. So, as great as Pete Carroll is as a coach, like you still need the guys out there, right, on the field, the players, the difference makers. And I just don't think they have enough of those guys in order to break through and go on some type of playoff run this year. But I could see them being a competitive team, a respectable team that's in it every week against most opponents, and finishes with a favorable record down the stretch. Like, they have high expectations. They're going for it. They believe they can be a playoff team this year. Like, you can't really aim for anything else, at this time of year.
Sure.
But I do think there's a cap on how far they can go just because of where the roster is.
Yeah, we're talking Raiders with Tashan Reed from The Athletic. Speaking of potential playmakers, and I know, Tashan, it's really early. It's hard to determine anything, but you mentioned Ashton Jeanty. How has he looked so far?
Yeah, so I mean, for running backs in particular, these practices is kind of tough to evaluate these guys because they're not really getting tackled. But we did get to see him in pads for the first time the last couple of days, and they aren't bringing him to the ground, but you see a little bit of thumping, and you can just see his explosiveness. I think that's what stood out to me the most is he only needs a small sliver of space to reel off a 15, 20-yard gain. And again, the defenders aren't going at him like they usually would, but you could tell on certain runs that would have been a big play, right? Even without the contact being full. And also as a receiver, he's a guy that not just routes out of the backfield, he can legitimately go out into the slot or go out wide and run real receiver routes and separate against defensive backs and linebackers down the field. So I think he's a guy that, both in the run game and the pass game is going to have a huge impact. They need him to have a huge impact this season. They're going to feed him the rock. I don't think it'll be quite as much as he got it at Boise State. That's not really replicable in the NFL, but he's going to get a ton of touches in this offense for sure. And also I would keep an eye out for him as a guy that's going to be in a mix to potentially be a kick returner for them. With them moving up that touchback line to the 35, we're going to see teams field kickoffs a lot more often than, we've seen in the past. And even though he is a high draft pick, I wouldn't rule him out as a guy that could potentially get involved in that role as well.
Hey, Sean, what went wrong with Antonio Pierce? I remember when he first took over, he was saying all the right things, wanted to create the correct kind of Raider identity, if you will. It didn't lead to wins. Was it coaching? Was it just lack of quarterback? Did he get a fair shake? Like, could anybody have succeeded in that position? What did you make of Antonio Pierce's time?
I think it was a combination of things. As you mentioned, they didn't have a quarterback. They signed Gardner Minshew last year, and that went terribly for them. I think the coaching staff that he constructed had issues, obviously, with him firing offensive coordinator Luke Getsy and the offensive line coach at the time about halfway through the season. That's a pretty big swing and a miss. You miss on your quarterback and your offensive coordinator. It's probably not going to be a good season. But he also struggled when it came to the game management. I would say that was a really big failing for him. Timeout management, fourth down decision making, things of that nature. Like he just really didn't do well in those areas. And there were a few close games last year that the Raiders lost that they potentially may have won if they had better decision making in those areas. And so it was an amalgamation of factors. I think I'll give him is the players respected him to the end. All that stuff was real. It wasn't fake. It wasn't phony. But that's not enough, to be a successful head coach. And, could you have argued that he should have gotten another year? Sure. But if you feel like you have a clear upgrade out there at head coach and you're in a position to go get him, you got to go get him. And they feel like they landed that in Pete Carroll.
Tashan, as you no doubt know, we have a lot of still disgruntled fans of the Oakland Raiders in this area. That said, I'm just wondering from your standpoint, what's the state of the relationship between the team and fans in Vegas now? Are fans there in Vegas, have they fully embraced the Raiders? Is there still a little bit of a, we'll see? I mean, how would you characterize the state of that relationship, if you will?
I would say they fully embrace it. I think people in Vegas in general, with this sports sort of surge we've seen in recent years between the Golden Knights, the Aces, the A's are going to be here in a couple of years, and then the Raiders. This city hasn't really ever had professional sports before, so they're kind of just like grateful to have teams in a way. And it helps that they have an iconic brand in the Raiders and a team that kind of has that cool factor to them, even though they haven't had the on-field success. But I would say the city's taken to them pretty quickly. Another factor of it is like it's Las Vegas. Like this is a transplant city. Like there are a ton of people here that are from California, specifically Southern California or even from the Bay Area. People that were like Raiders fans anyway. You know what I mean? And then you have it's an hour and a half flight from LA and the Bay. Like a ton of people just come here from California for the games as well. And so I don't think they've really had any issues in terms of fan support. The thing that happens with them is Las Vegas in a new stadium, like you get a lot of visiting fans at the games because those people, that's their one time to go see their team play in a new stadium. They're willing to pay 3 times, 4 times face value on these tickets. And if you're a fan who has 8 or 9, so you have season tickets, you got 8 or 9 home games, and somebody's offering you $800 for a $200 ticket, you're probably going to take that, right? You're not going to care that, this person's a 49ers fan or whatever. So you do have some of those weird games where it's like 50-50 with the crowd. But I wouldn't really use that as something that's reflective of them not having support in Vegas, as it's kind of like it's Las Vegas. People want to come to Las Vegas and their team playing there is an excuse to come there. So they haven't really had any issues with fan support.
Gotcha. Interesting.
All right. My final one, Sean, you obviously covered the NFL. I want to ask you about a team in the Raiders division. It seems like Denver is the sexy pick this year. I think ESPN had them ranked as the 6th best roster in the league. Are you buying all this hype regarding the Denver Broncos?
6th best is a little strong for me personally. Like I think their defense is going to be pretty great. Last year it was already great, and they made some pretty key additions down the spine of the defense. The question for me is the offense. Like I'm still not sold on them. Like Bo Nix had a really good rookie season. Don't get me wrong, but the receivers don't really blow me away. And I kind of just question like is that offense really explosive enough to hang with like the heavy hitters in the AFC when you talk about the Chiefs? And they weren't good last year, but they could put up points like the Bengals or the Bills or the Ravens. Like, can they really beat those teams in the playoffs? Like, I'm not too sure about that, but I do think that they'll have a really good defense led by reigning defensive player of the year, and that they have an ascending young quarterback and a good head coach, like I mentioned earlier. So I do think they'll still be in the mix to be a playoff team, but top 6 records in the NFL, I don't know about that one.
Tashan Reed, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
All right
now, my guy.
By the way, he's very certain that